Hey, so Polyend's released a new device, and yeah, I've sort of been following along with the teaser trailers, and now that it's finally released and people are talking about it, like it's gone to Namm and there's a whole bunch of videos coming out. Jordan's done a bit of a showcase of what it is, and a lot of people are asking questions, and some of those have come my way because of me being the little Polyend Tracker user here. And I thought, yeah, because I'm sort of out in the middle of nowhere and no one to talk synth stuff about, let's just make a video about the Polyend Tracker Mini. Like, it's a smaller handheld unit, but it's definitely got way more grunt than the original tracker, like larger CPU. It's got like microphone, but it's got this button layout, and I was sort of in two minds. So let's have a bit of a chat about it. And yeah, I'm not that flash, it's a trick. Alright, here we are with the OG Polyend Tracker, and I've just brought this out to help me explain a few things that I find really interesting about the Tracker Mini. As this isn't where I started with trackers, and I think this is going to be a bit of a journey because my original way of making music was using a Game Boy with a cartridge that holds LSDJ, and this was the way I made music for a long time. Like, at the time it was a lot of budget constraints, and I could pick up one of these old DMGs for $20 to $50 depending how expensive they were. Go on to Kitchbench, go on to Cat Skull, buy all the buttons and do all the mods. Like, got the MIDI mod in there, and I've got a sound mod as well. I think I bass boosted this one, so they do make those lovely chippy dippy tunes. And yeah, this was predominantly how I got into electronic music and started experimenting with a bunch of different things. So I have a very fondness for chip tunes in general, and like from that, because we're dealing with like instruments and like square and saw waves, it sort of led down the path of like picking up synthesizers, and that's where I got my monologue. And yeah, so I sort of grew in that way. It was a bit of a budget restraint, but then I was at a point a couple of years ago when I felt like I wanted a bit of an upgrade, because like I would do chip tunes on the bus to and from work, and I would like take the Game Boy around, and whenever I had like a couple of minutes and that, I could start working on my track. And it wasn't like this is bad, it was more that I could only make one type of music or using like exploiting the engine, and I wanted to try other types of music or get into like other types of instruments or other types of sounds. So I wanted to find something that was a little bit more powerful. And I will say the Polyend Tracker wasn't my first thing I saw, because during Weekly Beats, which is a challenge to make a song every week run by Trash80, the person that does the MIDI mod, he was working on a very cool little device and released it under the M8 by Deadywave. And that was really interesting. Like, people were starting to pick them up and use them for their tracks, and it's like, it's got samples, it's got the engines on here, it's got all the stuff from like beautiful instruments. Like, it was a really powerful unit. And same thing on the other side was the Polyend Tracker sort of came out, and I was sort of sitting on my hands for a bit which one I wanted to go for. Now, I didn't want to just jump at a purchase, but I sort of had an opportunity where there was only one unit left in Australia for the Polyend Tracker, and then the pre-orders were finalising for the second round of the M8, and I was like, well, I really enjoy this sort of workflow, but there are a few things that sort of like didn't help me as much as I wanted to grow on my music journey. Like, the big one for me is because I wear glasses, I'm constantly bringing this close up to my face, and it's such a small screen, it does impact the flow. But it's not just the small screen, it's just how we navigate these sort of handheld instruments, because they are designed around a Game Boy. It's like you have the D-pad, you have the start and select buttons. How we navigate is using the controls to move around. So as you can see, we have our song view, and then we go into our chains, which is part of our phrases, which is pretty much one bar. You can do some tricky things, but really, and then we go into our instrument, and then we go into our tables. Tables are really powerful, but it's sort of like if I was working on a melody, like that's all I can see as I'm working. If I want to go back out and go into the chain, I can change to a different part of another melody and work on it. So I didn't have any sort of like big picture view of what I was working on, like, and trying to understand music theory and like grow as a musician, it was a bit tough. And that was something that I looked to the Polyend Tracker for. One bigger screen. We have like the way we can see multiple channels, so 4 channels or 8 channels. That really spoke to me. A full keyboard, like with my computer I had like a MIDI keyboard that was 4 octaves at the time, and I'm like, so I get like a 4 octave keybed on a device, so it's like a mini portable studio that I'm working with. And it was sample based. Like on here you can have samples, but they're very primitive, and it's mostly about the sound engines themselves, because it's like you got 2 square wave channels. You have a wavetable, which is where you can do some of the sampling from, and then you got a noise channel. So you really have one channel to do any sort of sample based stuff. So I've already got all this stuff, and like the Mate was a really powerful device. I'm not going to dog it. It's like something I still want to try out and get my hands on. But this sort of spoke to me more, where it's like I could have a full studio on the go. So biting the bullet, I decided to go with the Polyend Tracker, and I do not regret the purchase. It's definitely been something I've really enjoyed working with and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And it's like the grid layout, the jog wheel, how it's all controlled, and like that sort of one click through, because like UX wise, it's like I can get around this device without having to like sort of go through those button combos and sort of like, oh, I need to go across 4 times to get to a point. It's like I can just, I want to do my sound playbacks, I want to record a new sample, like everything is there. And then they started showing some like little teaser trailers of their new device, which was sort of like this shaped, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I decided to do a little comedic, let's see what we could fit in the Polyend Tracker space that they had. So it's like this shape, and just taking these buttons and that and seeing how we can place it. And I just threw something together, and then as time went on, then on the 12th they released the Polyend Tracker Mini. So I sort of sat on my hands for a bit, and as videos were coming out, like Ben Jordan's video, Namm videos are popping up, and like the little teaser trailer when it fully came out, it's sort of like I had a little bit more of like understanding of what was going on, and I thought let's just sort of chat through the elements, because it's like a lot of the buttons here have carried across onto the device. So one thing I was really concerned was just to see this sort of interface with the Polyend Tracker, and like they did remove the button grid and they did remove the jog wheel, which sort of upset me a bit, because I'm like, I really like this thing because of that. Was I could punch in like 4 octaves of notes at once, or like I can see where I'm working, same with the jog wheel. Now with these buttons, and most of them are carried across, like all these ones are come across, most of these have come across, like the play, do all these bits. The coloured buttons have come across, so a lot of the navigation around the pages and that. But there was this section up here that pretty much disappeared, and they have one button called menu, until a Namm video showed that you could click it and it'll bring up like the menu system over here, which I was sort of mixed about, because it's like you have like, that's one thing I like doing. If I want to record a sample, I press the sample button. If I want to change the way or edit it, I can hit that button. But it's not too much of a menu dive for me, like 3 layers deep. Like I've got some synthesizers that I work with, and some of the stuff I do professionally, like there's way more than like 3 clicks deep, which frustrates me to no end. Yeah, I wasn't too upset about that, but they did add something new, which I don't know if it's just part of the system, but they did add those macro buttons. I threw dials on the Polyend Tracker Mini prototype that I drew up, because that's something I really wanted to see on the tracker itself, like being able to control instruments and that. But I think how the macros are going to work is ways to navigate around to those favorite areas of yours. And they did say if you hold shift, you get 8 lots of macros. So I really enjoyed that. So I'm interested to see how those macros sort of link up with the tracker core framework, and how we can use them to like improve the workflow, like being able to set macros. So like macro 1, I'm going to record a sample, then macro 2 sends me into the instrument, I can start editing it. So we can create like pipelines to go from no sound to having it implemented in the play. Like it sort of gives us more ways to customize how we want to use the tracker interface. So now another thing that they did remove from the tracker is their radio in. So we can't sample from the radio anymore, and is something I've used quite a lot to just get random samples, like using advertising to add like sort of quirky quotes from like Australian ads into my music, and that's been a lot of fun. But as a cool compromise, they have embedded a microphone into the new tracker, and that is something I really wanted to try with the Polyend Tracker itself. I had a smaller microphone than this is my video one, but I would have it plugged into the tracker and then taking the whole thing around trying to capture sounds that way. And it had a lot of potential, but it was just a little bit too big and clunky and too many moving parts to sort of work out the way I wanted. So I ended up taking I had a smaller field recorder, but take something like that out on the road and capture all my sounds that way. And then I could come back and start putting them into the tracker and processing them. So yeah, there was a workaround, but now it seems that it's a one enclosed device for going out into the field, capturing sounds and being able to manipulate them. So pretty happy about that at the advent of losing the radio. Now I didn't see a paste function on the Mini, but I'm guessing is like a shift copy, because that's how it sort of works on the Play itself. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. As you can probably tell, I'm a bit of a stickler for inputs, and because it's not really just one device and it's like, oh, it's got all the bells and whistles in the world, it's how you control it. And it's not about like having the best gear, it's about having gear that you want to use every day. And having a bit of a sit back and think, like, the new way we interact with the device, it's definitely got its pros and cons. I am leaning more into I like it. But it's the same framework, like it looks very similar to how the tracker works, and like they've said they've added some new features, so it does have like stereo samples and all that, so they're definitely pluses for a lot of people. But they did sort of say that 1.7 is coming out around the same time, and they've sort of listed out some of the features, so I'm really excited to see the tracker get updated alongside with the release of the Mini. So in the end, how do I feel about this? And like, I'm still in the mindset, it's too early to tell. Like, we've only seen a couple of videos come out, and it would be nice to see more thorough reviews and what's going to happen with it, and like see how it does come out on launch. I know that I will gel with like the workflow, because I do enjoy the Polyend Tracker. The interface as well as the inputs, that's where I'm sort of like wanting to get more information about, and like sort of how that workflow goes. But like the macros, the microphone and all those sort of bits are still like, I think it'll be something that's very important, because like in the end, the one thing I can say is we're very spoilt for choice on hardware trackers in 2023. Like, we have the power of the NerdSect, we have the M8, which is another portable, really powerful handheld machine. We have like the original LSDJ. They are really powerful devices, and I've seen people have a lot of joy with them. And it's something that's been playing on my mind, because like back in the day, I do have a bit of a boneyard of these Game Boys, and like trying to get them all working, because it's like they are machines, they are going to degrade over time, and like some of these things are definitely older than me. So it's like, will there be a time in my life where this sort of technology just can't carry on? And it's like certain chips, they degrade over time, and CDs, they're already starting to oxidize. So it's like that tracker sort of workflow, is it going to sort of die out? And with these new devices, it's giving a new generation access to creating this type of music. And me personally, I do think trackers still have a lot of merit for music creation, and how I personally use it, not just like in this sort of space, but also professionally as well. The Polyend Tracker for me has really resonated well, and I do strive to try and find those devices that are sort of like a daily carry, or something that I can just go to and get an idea down, or just experiment and explore. Because you can have like the most powerful setup in the world, like you have all the gear and everything's working, but it's like, does it make you inspired to create music, or do you feel like you get bottlenecked by it? And like, that's not to say the Mate or the NerdSect does this, or this sort of handheld tracker interface. Like, it's definitely got merit, and I reckon if I had my hands on a Mate, I would be having a lot of fun, because it does replicate that sort of LSDJ workflow. I do think I'll gel a lot with it. So maybe one day I will pick up a Mate. Maybe I will pick up a Polyend Tracker Mini. I'm definitely thinking about the tutorial series I released. What would I need to do to sort of tell people the button combos, or how like the inputs will interact with like the tutorial. I tried to keep it very generic, but it was focused on the Polyend Tracker. So just thinking of those sort of crossovers and supporting devices as they come out. So yeah, thank you for listening to my rambling, and yeah, I just wanted to sort of put some ideas together right before it came out. Like, I did enjoy just making that little visualization, but how they approach the sort of handheld tracker, very interesting to see when it's in the hands of people. So in the end, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time.